So I found out that there is a colourless blender as well as a white blender for pigment markers, so I thought I'd do a little comparison. So the first thing that I thought I'd do is have a little play with it. So I pop down a little bit of magenta red shade here, and then I get the Colourless Blender, completely new as you can see, not even touched on the nib, and I think, okay, let's have a look at this, see how this blends. So I work into the colour, blending it up and down, and then off into the sort of the paper itself. And as you can see, I do get quite a nice gradation of tone from a sort of light dark to a light. But if you look carefully at where I originally put the magenta marker down, you can see it's kind of a bit speckled and grainy. But that was with the chisel nib, so I think why don't I try a different colour and try the fine nib. So I use phthalo teal light here, and I pop a little bit of that down with the fine nib and then try blending over the top of that with the Colourless Blender. And as you can see, the strokes show up and it's got that speckly grainy kind of quality. So I flip back to the chisel nib and I try doing some flicked strokes with the blender, the Colourless Blender this time. But again, you can see that kind of speckled look to it underneath. So I decided to do a comparison sketch, and I use this Belvine picture, which is one of my old reference photos, and I just draw out one of the flowers and I tackle it first of all using the colours in Colourless Blender. So I'm just using two colours, and I go in with the phthalo teal light, and I'm just using this blue, and then I'm also going to use the magenta red shade on top of that, so I can get a kind of a light purple kind of colour hopefully when I blend them together. So with the colours down, I'm trying to do two things with the Colourless Blender. The first thing is, of course, blend those two colours together that I put down to get a kind of a pale, very light kind of purpley kind of look to the petals on this flower. But the second thing you can see me doing is also dragging some of that colour either upwards from where I put it, or using some of the colour that's left on the nib of the marker as I kind of try and blend with it, and moving to a different part and then putting that colour down somewhere else and sort of working it with the Colourless Blender to try and blend it in. And here I found the Colourless Blender similar to the white blender in that the nib frequently gets contaminated with the colours that you're blending, so you then have to wipe it off on a scrap piece of paper to return it to its kind of original blank, plain, colourless state. And that kind of thing doesn't bother me. I've gotten used to it with the white blender. Really what I wanted to see from this comparison was how well it blended the colours together, how smooth they compared to each other, colourless and white blender. So I use the same process and the same two colours for the rest of the petals on this particular flower, and I'm using the Colourless Blender to try and blend the two together, get this nice pale purple to give the leaf a little bit more visual attractiveness, because the Belvine leaves are really just kind of white leaves with a little tinge of colour. And then I add some green all the way around it in order to give it a kind of a contrast for you to see what's happening. So with that one done, it's on to the next one, and I'm going to do this one with the white blender pen. So exactly the same colours from exactly the same pens. So I'm using the phthalo teal light here, and I'm also going to use the magenta red shade in order to blend these two together and give it that kind of light purple look. So with the colours on, what I'm trying to do now is use the white blender to do exactly the same kind of thing I tried to do with the Colourless Blender on the other one. So the first thing I do is blend those two colours together to get myself a kind of a light purple. And then the other thing I'm doing is using the nib, once it's gotten sort of contaminated whilst blending those two colours together, to drag the colour outwards, upwards, and place that colour whilst it's still on the nib of the marker in different parts of the petal. To add a bit of tone, to add a bit of shade somewhere else. And you should be able to notice straight away that when you do that with the white blender, it's stronger with the color and stronger with the tone than it is on the opposite one using the Colourless Blender. And you could argue that it's just because I'm a bit more experienced with the white blender, but I think the pictures kind of speak for themselves. So when I feel that the mid-tone colours that I've put on the petal on this right-hand side picture, when I feel as though they're a little bit too strong, what I like with the white blender is I can go back in there, and by just working over and over, you can almost pick up and erase the colour that you've put on there using the white blender. Obviously I've wiped it off on a scrap piece of paper first to get it nice and kind of blank again before I try doing this, but it's a nice technique that you can use with it. So I speed up this next section because again it's the same process and the same colours, only this time I'm using the white blender pen. And hopefully what you can already see happening is that the blending of the colours is smoother and less grainy than what you can see on the left hand side. And I even put a little bit of green around the side of it as well, so you can see that comparison of the pale versus the dark. So when I compare them side by side, I notice a couple of things. The Colourless Blender one on the left hand side, the colours appear to be brighter and stronger, but there's that graininess that I really just did not really like. The graininess that you can see underneath when I've tried to blend with the Colourless Blender. On the right hand side, It's a much smoother blend because of the white blender, but the colors are slightly dulled because of the white that's coming off each time you're trying to blend those colors together. I mean, those are the two main things that I found. If you've used the colorless or the white, let me know in the comments below what you thought and what you thought the strengths and weaknesses were. If you like this video, then you might want to check out some of my other pigment marker videos. I'll put a link below to a YouTube playlist that I've got that is just pigment marker videos, but you might want to check out some of my other art tutorials as well. And if you found it helpful and useful, then I appreciate all shares, all subscribes, likes, and any kind of comments, positive or negative, that you want to write below.